June 4, 1943, Railroad Street, Mexia, Texas. The pencil shook slightly in Unteroffizier Werner Burkhardt's hand as he wrote in his hidden diary. Words that could have earned him solitary confinement, if discovered. The Americans must be lying to us. No nation could have so much while fighting on two fronts. Through the train window he had seen something that overturned 3 years of Nazi propaganda. It was 10 p.m., yet the Texas plains glowed with electric light. Every farmhouse, every shop, every street illuminated. Germany had been darkened by blackout regulations since 1940. Rural electrification there barely reached 1/5 of all farms. But here, in the land they had been told was collapsing in decadence, electricity flowed like water. Outside, 850 veterans of Ramos Africa Corps stepped off passenger coaches, not cattle cars, but cushioned Pullman trains with dining services and sleeping berths. The citizens of Mexia gathered to watch. They had no idea they were witnessing the start of one of history's quietest revolutions, the psychological demolition of Nazism through exposure to American abundance. Defeat and capture, it began weeks earlier, May 13, 1943, Tunisia. General Georgian von Arnim, Rommel's successor, surrendered with 250,000 and 275,000 German and Italian troops. The Wehrmacht's desert elite, men who had once driven the British to Egypt, were now prisoners. Among them was Hauptmann Friedrich Racky, holder of the Iron Cross First Class, wounded twice in North Africa. His diary, later found in U.S. archives, became a rare record of the mental collapse that spread among German POWs once they came face to face with American reality. First contact with the machine, their journey began at Oran, Algeria. In makeshift camps, thousands of Germans waited for transport to America, and the cracks in their worldview began immediately. The U.S. Army processed tens of thousands with mechanical precision. Photographs, identity cards, medical exams, inoculations, all conducted by officers fluent in German. Each step followed the Geneva Convention to the letter. Even the efficiency impressed them. But what truly stunned them was the food. Oberstfrieder Hans Mungler of the 21st Panzer Division later wrote, "At Oran they fed us better than we had eaten in 6 months of desert war. White bread, real coffee, meat twice a day. We thought it was propaganda. Then we learned it was simply their normal ration. The voyage west, the Liberty ships that would carry them across the Atlantic, embodied the power of American production. The SS Robert E. Peary had been built in 4 days and 15 hours, a feat the Germans would have dismissed as myth. By mid-1943, the U.S. was producing 3 such ships daily. These vessels, returning from delivering supplies to Europe, carried up to 30,000 prisoners a month. For 2 weeks, they crossed the Atlantic surrounded by abundance. Feldwebel Kurt Zimmermann of the 90th Light Division observed that the ship's crew discarded more food in a day than his company had eaten in a week. They threw away half-eaten steaks, loaves of bread, gallons of milk, not to taunt us, but because waste meant nothing to them. Their supply was endless. Even the ship's radar antenna, standard equipment on a cargo ship, stunned Lieutenant Colonel Wilhelm von Stobern, a Prussian aristocrat. We thought only Germany and perhaps the British possessed such technology. On a mere freighter it was commonplace. I realized then Germany had already lost. Arrival in America, August 2, 1943, Norfolk Naval Base, Virginia. The Germans disembarked into a scene that shattered every illusion. Norfolk's port stretched for miles, cranes unloading ships at a pace no European port could match. In 1 day, this single harbor handled more cargo than Hamburg managed in a week. Gefreiter Johann Weber, once a Ruhr factory worker, counted 47 cargo ships in various stages of loading. Each crane lifted massive containers effortlessly with electric power, no coal smoke in sight. The prisoners marched past parking lots full of civilian automobiles, hundreds owned by dock workers. In Germany, car ownership was the privilege of the elite. The people's car, the Volkswagen, remained mostly fantasy. Then came the trains, not boxcars or cattle wagons, but Pullman coaches with padded seats. white tablecloth dining cars, and observation decks. Hopman Rack noted in disbelief. We boarded like tourists, not prisoners. A sergeant apologized that the air conditioning was not working properly. Air conditioning! We had believed only Hitler's train had such things. Across America, by train, the 3-day journey from Norfolk to Texas would become a rolling classroom in the reality of American power. From Virginia through Tennessee and Kentucky, the Germans pressed their faces to the glass. Every small town was alight, shop windows glowing, signs flashing, factories running all night. Obergefrieder Müller wrote, each town had more electricity than all of Hamburg. The guard said this was normal, that every town had power since the 1920s. I called him a liar. He just smiled and said we would see. At a Virginia rail stop, they watched American railwaymen refuel and recoal an engine in half an hour, a process that would have taken 2 hours in Germany. Everything was mechanized. The workers smoked expensive cigarettes, drank Coca-Cola, and wore boots worth 2 months of German wages. Feldwebel Heinrich Müller, an engineer from Siemens, calculated that one rail yard used more electricity in an hour than his entire Berlin district used in a day. The waste was magnificent. They left lights burning in empty buildings, fans running in vacant rooms, the carelessness of infinite resource. Industrial revelation through Kentucky and Tennessee, the train rolled past industrial monuments. The Alcoa aluminum plant's furnaces consumed more power than Munich itself. The synthetic rubber complex near Louisville. 4 giant factories built in 18 months, produced 8 times Germany's annual total. Oberleutnant Erich Hoffmann, a chemist from IG Farben, understood the implications instantly. Each plant was more advanced than anything we had. And there were dozens across the country. I realized we had entered a new age, one we could never match. When they reached Michigan, the Germans saw Ford's Willow Run plant, where a bomber rolled off the line every 63 minutes. 17 new B-24s were visible from the train. We had been told American aircraft were inferior, hastily built. But I saw precision, scale, and power beyond imagination. Heartland of plenty crossing the Mississippi at St. Louis, the prisoners saw barges loaded with grain, more than Germany's entire 1942 harvest. Grain elevators lined the riverbanks like towers of abundance. Unteroffizier Carl Schmidt, a Bavarian farmer's son, wrote, "They handle food as we handle ammunition, in endless quantities. I saw one barge loaded with enough wheat to feed my village for 5 years." In Kansas City, the air smelled of meatpacking plants. The POWs, who had eaten meat perhaps once a week, saw workers devouring beef sandwiches on their lunch breaks. Guards bought hamburgers for them, thick with cheese and vegetables, for $1. This was not special. This was normal. Camp Heron, Texas. When the trains finally reached Texas, the Germans found themselves in compounds that surpassed their own barracks at home. Wooden buildings with electric light, hot showers, flush toilets, and heated rooms. The hospital astonished them. Lieutenant Colonel Dr. Friedrich Bauer, chief surgeon of the 164th Light Division, found modern X-ray machines, surgical tools, and even penicillin. The miracle drug German doctors had only heard rumors about. They used it freely, even on prisoners with minor infections. We were losing men for lack of sulfur drugs, and they gave us penicillin. In the camp kitchens, POWs discovered refrigerators, electric mixers, gas ranges, and dishwashers. Feldwebel Otto Krebs, a chef from Munich, confessed we threw away more food than my family had seen in 3 years. Not spoiled, just extra. Regulations required a 10% surplus. I wept as I threw good bread into the garbage. Work in America. By autumn 1943, labor shortages led to German prisoners working in American fields and factories. An unintentional but devastating blow to Nazi ideology. They were trucked through the heartland. No blindfolds, no secrets. They saw farms with electric pumps, tractors, trucks, and even black laborers eating better than most Germans. Unteroffizier Herbert Lang at a cotton gin near Houston wrote, "The farmer was no aristocrat. He had electricity, running water, a car, a tractor. Even his Negro workers ate lunches with more meat than a German worker saw in a week. And this was normal. In Nebraska, they saw machines harvest sugar, beats faster than 100 men. A farmer's teenage son drove a tractor worth more than the lifetime earnings of a German peasant. He laughed when I said so. He said it wasn't even a good tractor. A new model was coming. Those who worked in factories were even more shaken. POs at a Campbell's soup plant in New Jersey watched automated belts and machines run by elderly women producing more in a day than German factories did in a month. At Detroit's River Rouge complex, they saw 100,000 workers building jeeps and tank engines. Even laborers owned cars, sometimes two. We thought the guards were joking. Workers owning 2 cars, but the parking lots were full. By late 1943, American intelligence officers observed a new phenomenon, ideological collapse syndrome. The most ardent Nazis stopped arguing when shown production figures. They had seen too much. Major Paul Newland reported, "They no longer believe in victory. Many ask for newspapers and books. They speak of America with respect, sometimes awe." The prisoner-run camp newspapers shifted from defiance to curiosity, publishing discussions on democracy and post-war reconstruction. Lieutenant Herman Gutz wrote, "We were told America was weak, ruled by Jews, decadent. But I see the opposite. A nation united, strong, organized. We were told fairy tales by criminals." By late 1943, the change among the German prisoners had become visible even to the American guards. The arrogance that once filled the compounds was fading, replaced by quiet disbelief. The Afrika Korps men, once Rommel's proud soldiers, now spent their evenings reading English newspapers, listening to jazz on the camp loudspeakers, or watching American newsreels screened in open-air cinemas. At first, the sight of Americans laughing at their own politicians confused them. How could a people mock their leaders and still be strong? But soon they began to admire it. Unteroffizier Hans Becker wrote in his journal, "Perhaps this is their strength. They can argue, disagree, yet work together." In Germany, we would be shot for laughing at Hitler. The psychological offensive, the American War Department, had realized something powerful. These POWs could become living proof to post-war Germany of democracy's strength. A secret program began, Special Projects Division, based at Fort Kearny, Rhode Island. German prisoners with anti-Nazi leanings were quietly transferred there, trained, and turned into educators for others. They published newspapers like Der Ruffs, The Call, written by prisoners for prisoners, filled with articles on democracy, science, and the horrors of totalitarianism. At first, the hardcore Nazis burned copies, but over time, even they began to read in secret. Hauptmann Rack, once fiercely loyal to the Reich, later admitted, "I read Der Ruff only to mock it." But as the months passed, I could not deny its truth. The Americans did not force us. They reasoned with us. That was more dangerous than any gun. The collapse of faith. By mid-1944, rumors began to reach the camps. D-Day, Allied landings in Normandy, the bombing of Berlin. The Germans huddled around bulletin boards showing maps and casualty figures. When the guards confirmed that Paris had been liberated, there was no cheering, no outrage, only silence. For many, the dream of victory finally died. Oberstfrieder Memmeler recalled, "We sat in the mess hall for an hour without speaking. It was as if a god had died. We had believed in Hitler as children believe in fathers. Now we knew he had led us to ruin." Some men refused to believe it still. They drew chalk maps of imaginary German counterattacks. But by Christmas 1944, even they fell quiet. News of the Ardennes offensive came. Then the word defeat again. There was no hope left. Encounters with America's people outside the barbed wire. America kept revealing itself in ways that tore at old prejudices. In small Texas towns, farmers and their wives brought the prisoners sandwiches and cigarettes. Children waved at them. Sometimes the prisoners were invited to church picnics, under armed guard but welcome nonetheless. For men who had been told America was run by soulless Jews and corrupt capitalists, The warmth was disarming. Unteroffizier Herbert Lang wrote, "A farmer's wife handed me pie through the fence. She said, 'You'll go home someday. Remember, we're not your enemy.'" I nearly cried. Even African-American soldiers guarding the camps overturned German assumptions. Many POs had believed racist Nazi propaganda about America's degenerate races. But now they saw black sergeants commanding white men, driving jeeps, and speaking perfect English. Feldwebel Kurt Zimmermann confessed in his diary, "The black guards were disciplined, confident, and proud. They treated us fairly, sometimes more fairly than the white guards." I realized how much we had been lied to. The news from Europe. In April 1945, the camp radios crackled with news that stunned every man. Hitler was dead. Berlin had fallen. The prisoners gathered in stunned silence. No cheers, no curses, just exhaustion. Then came the newsreels. The liberation of Buchenwald, Dachau, Bergen-Belsen. At first, many called them forgeries. They had been told the concentration camps were labor camps. But soon they saw unmistakable details. The uniforms, the German signs, the S officers. Hauptmann Racky's journal recorded the moment that broke him. The projector showed heaps of corpses, men like skeletons, women with shaved heads. I saw an SS officer in the corner, my old comrade from Africa. He was guarding the dead. I could not look away. Many prisoners wept. Some tore their swastika badges from hidden boxes and threw them into the dirt. Oberstfrieder Munguler wrote simply, "Now we know why the world hates us." Transformation. The American guards noticed a profound change. The once defiant prisoners began volunteering for library duty, English classes, and even public debates. Camp universities formed, lecture halls built by prisoners themselves. They studied history, engineering, law, and ethics under supervision of American professors. By late 1945, many POWs had completed hundreds of hours of instruction in democratic principles, literature, and world history. Major Newland wrote in a report to Washington, "They are no longer the soldiers who arrived 2 years ago. They have seen the strength of a free society, and it has conquered them more completely than any army could." Returning home January 1946, Bremerhaven, Germany. The first ships carrying German POWs back to Europe departed from New York Harbor. As they sailed past the Statue of Liberty, hundreds of men stood silently at the railings. Some saluted. Unteroffizier Burkhardt, the man who had written of disbelief 3 years earlier, penned his final entry. "They defeated us with kindness. I leave America without hate, only shame and wonder. If Germany is ever to live again, it must become like this land, strong, just, and free." The return home was a second shock. Germany lay in ruins, cities reduced to rubble, people starving, and families scattered. Those who had seen America became the bridge between the old world and the new. Many joined reconstruction efforts, local councils, or democratic organizations. Others became teachers and journalists. Among them were future intellectuals like Alfred Anderschich and Walter Kolbenhoff, editors of Der Ruff, who would go on to shape post-war German thought. Their voices, once silenced by Nazism, now echoed with a new conviction that freedom and prosperity did not come from fear or blood, but from liberty and reason. Legacy. By 1947, over 370,000 German POWs had passed through 500 camps across the United States. Fewer than 1% attempted escape, not because they feared punishment, but because most had no desire to leave. The U.S. government quietly noted a pattern. The longer a prisoner stayed in America, the less likely he was to remain a Nazi. General George C. Marshall summarized it best: "We did not re-educate them with words, but with refrigerators, tractors, and light bulbs." Decades later, historians would call it the softest victory in history. A war won not only by weapons, but by ideals, by the simple, overwhelming proof of what a free people could build. Epilogue. 20 years later, April 1963, Munich. A gray-haired man stood before a classroom of German students. His name was Friedrich Rack, once a captain of Rommel's Afrika Korps, now a history teacher. On the blackboard behind him were the words, Democracy is not weakness. It is strength controlled by conscience. One student asked, "Hiraki, when did you stop believing in Hitler?" He smiled sadly. "When I saw America by train. When I saw a farmer with electricity. When I saw that a free man could live better than a soldier of the Reich." He closed his notebook. "That was the day I stopped being conquered by defeat and began to be liberated by truth." Outside, the school lights burned bright. The same electricity that had once astonished him through a train window in 1943.